So I'm going to start out today's ology with a confession. I am not always honest with myself about the prevalence of religious imagery and religious concepts in my songs. Pilgrim Highway, my song Pilgrim Highway, which some of you might know, was my mother-in-law's favorite song of mine. And the song is named for an actual highway, a stretch of road leading kind of south from Boston to Cape Cod, where my in-laws live. And I wrote the song grieving the loss of a singer-songwriter friend of mine, a man named Dave Carter. And in its writing, I kind of fell back on a lot of conventionist religious imagery from my Catholic upbringing. And I quote, let's see, here's the last verse is, though some we love may by the wayside fall, we shall never feel abandoned or alone. There'll be a glorious reunion with them all just beyond that last bend in the road. Right? Pretty conventionally Catholic right there. And my mother-in-law called me on it. She said, that's your most Catholic song. And at the time, I wasn't big enough to admit it. And I said, no, that's not Catholicism. That's just bluegrass spirituality, because it's a bluegrass song. And this is not an infrequent occurrence when someone analyzes one of my songs and points out the religious imagery and language I didn't even realize I was using. So today, I thought it would be interesting to talk about how spirituality finds its way into art, both conventional, kind of God-based religious stuff, and maybe what you might call less traditional or more nature-based kind of generalized spirituality. And I want to try and do this as respectfully as possible. And I'm not a conventionally religious person myself anymore, and never really was. But I do thoroughly acknowledge its role in helping people that do find themselves to be religious folks, and I don't ever want to belittle or make light of that. So with that in mind, I figured I needed a real deep cat to kind of dive into this particular kind of ology. And I can think of none deeper or more eloquent than singer and songwriter and producer and just generally sharp-dressed man, Joe Henry. And I would love to bring him in right now. And I will do this and see if I'm getting that invite now, Joe. Momentarily, it'll pop up on the split screen here. There he is.
Seems to be happening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, man. Yeah,
Excellent.
I can sort of see the bottom half or the top half of your head. Oh, there you are.
If I sit up straight, you might be able to hear me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that better, Mark?
That's wonderful, man. It's good. I'm so glad to see you wore a vest. I usually do these things in a t-shirt or something, and I said I'm not bringing a t-shirt to a vest fight. That's the rule number one.
It's good to see you too. Thank you for having me.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. I wanted to kind of go back to that opening where you had joined for that opening story. You heard that little bit there, right, about my mother-in-law. So you heard me being so resistant to kind of identify myself as a particular religion or a member of any one tradition. And I don't know if that was, kind of looking back, I think maybe that was just out of fear that sort of, individual voice we're supposed to have as an artist might be kind of subsumed or overwhelmed by, kind of larger religious tradition. And I was just wondering if that's something that you have wrestled with in your life and in your work.
From the very beginning, Mark, I was raised by very devoted Southern Methodist people who really walked the walk. And I went to church as a young person like I went to school. Unless you were sick, that's where you were. But even as a very, very young person, and I mean 7, 8, maybe even younger than that, even though I so respected my parents and their devotion, I knew that was not, how I felt the world. I didn't feel that the image of God as portrayed in that Southern Methodist tradition was big enough for God as I sort of sensed, her to be, or however you want to articulate an acknowledgement of the divine.
Yeah.
So I was, really at odds of how to respect my parents and also respect myself, understanding that that was just not my spiritual lexicon. Nonetheless, it did inform me and became a part of my vocabulary in a cultural way as much as a spiritual way. And then when I began writing songs, I found a God ever present, but I was really uncomfortable with the language that I was taught to address a concept of God because it didn't really speak for me. And I was very concerned, a lot more concerned as a young man than I am now, with being misunderstood. I've made peace with being misunderstood now. I'm always, as my wife has said, my songs were so obtuse, I can pretty much say anything and nobody will know. but I was resistant, and I was concerned about being misconstrued as having an American Christian ideology. And while I know that's where I come from, it's very much like the fact that I come from the South, and I know that's a part of my formation. But I also know that I was really resistant to being confined by expectations of what it meant that I was a Southern person, because what I knew about my heritage as a young boy in Charlotte and then Atlanta, I was born at the very end of 1960. So, my very first memory is laying on the floor under my mother's ironing board while she watched Kennedy's funeral on TV and wept as she ironed. So just to give you some context as to the period of my life when I was conscious in the South, and I rejected what I felt, what I thought of the South, and what I assumed other people thought about the South. It was ugly, and in a really similar way, I rejected what I thought the framework of American Christianity would have to say about me. So even though it was part of my cultural language, I towed a very careful line for a long time. Anytime I saw, a religious reference, because that is imagery that I'm steeped in the same way that you are. I was really careful about it and concerned that I would be misunderstood as promoting, a Christian ideology when that's just too small a container, from my point of view, for how I imagine creation and a creator to exist.
It's so interesting to hear you use terms of scale, small, large, stuff like that, because as I've gotten older myself, I felt like the religious framework that I was raised up in, I was raised Catholic. I felt like it was just like what my parents did. They didn't seem particularly invested in it, other than the feeling that it didn't seem like something that they could walk away from, because that's not something you do. But when I looked at it, kind of through my own eyes and maybe a little bit through theirs, it just seemed it also felt very small. And the way that I think about kind of God now, if I had to really put it into words, is really in terms of a sense of a resolution of scale, or a scale of resolution is what I should say. You can see evidence of God on a very small scale, but in terms of like say details in nature or whatnot, or even just feelings inside you. But I think of God as this kind of awesome, above all else sort of thing, not necessarily an entity, or a white guy in a chair with a beard in the clouds, but just something that is at some level so awesome in the true sense of the word that you can't know it, and you can't even really explain it, which is why I'm having trouble finding the words. You know what I mean? It's like,
sure,
if it was any smaller than that, I'm not sure it would be worth being inspired by. Like, I feel like it has to be larger than the book or larger than any one tradition. Like if it can be contained in such a limited thing, then why is it so great? And so I hear you use these kind of scales of resolution, this kind of terminology, the size of things, and it really dovetails with kind of how I've come to understand God. And it's interesting because I think for a lot of my life, especially when I was doing biology, I have a background as a biologist before I got into music. I think my folks thought that I was an atheist, and I don't know if I ever really uttered the word atheist, and I don't really consider myself now or ever having been an atheist, but it just didn't fit in with a kind of smaller evocation of how they were describing God to me or how it was being presented.
No, I understand you, and as a young person, I felt like I was being asked to choose between no faith at all and the faith of my parents.
Right.
And I couldn't adopt my parents' point of view in regard to religious practice any more than I could ultimately adopt their point of view in regard to vocation. I knew I was on a different path. And a couple thoughts as you're talking. I thought of myself for a short time as sort of a Catholic by marriage because my wife was raised as an Italian, as a daughter of an Italian Catholic. In that tradition, when I began to go, at holidays, if I was visiting my in-laws and went to their church, I sort of resonated with it for a moment because I liked the ritual aspect of it,
Right.
Especially when they went into Latin, because it just became sort of a music to me. I wasn't challenged by ideology that I knew I would stumble over. But ultimately, because there were things assumed about us as a married couple that we, positions we had to take, because somehow we were being invited into the embrace of the Catholic tradition. We both realized that was not, speaking for us. It wasn't a compass blade that it was supposed to be. And I also recall, and I'm very close to my parents. My mother just passed away on May 31st. I'll acknowledge, if I talk about her in the present tense, it's out of habit. When my son Liban was first born, we live in Los Angeles, and my mom and dad came out. He was maybe 10 days old. And I walked into the kitchen one day, and my wife Melanie and my mom were talking, and my mother was weeping. And I understood that the conversation that I had interrupted was my mother, who was a deeply sincere, completely generous spirit, nonetheless was expressing concern because she knew that I had no plans of raising my child in a church.
Yeah.
And I had to say to her, and I was not being flip about it at all. I was being as sincere as I possibly could be. I said, Mom, I don't think we are aligned. It's just that, what you get from the Apostle Paul, I get from Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. That's my window into the divine. I don't think it's less. Your Apostle Paul, was a man trying to interpret, the trauma of living, trying to reconcile his humanity, trying to live robustly, knowing he would not always, which is, every religion in the world, I think, is designed to help us over that hurdle. How do we live knowing that we're going to die? How do we accept this day as a gift when we don't know how many more of them it might be? And it just became really clear to me. It's probably the first time I articulated it for myself, much less for her, that, music was my lexicon. Music was my way of understanding that I was part of something else and something bigger. It amplified mystery because ultimately, and I've written a little bit about this, the goal can never be to dispel mystery. Our call is to abide mystery. It's not a code that can be cracked, and I wouldn't even if I thought I could. There is that unknowing and unknowable that is in fact wildly liberating. And that's what I didn't understand as a child. I was being taught that this was supposed to nail everything down. And as I got older, and my spirituality took me to, closer to, Rilke and Rumi and Hafez and, Louis Armstrong, that this idea of nailing anything to the ground, as far as understanding, was a completely bankrupt idea. We weren't supposed to nail meaning to the ground. We were supposed to float off the floor like it was, if we could find a way to do it.
Yeah. Wow. So much there.
I'll also say, in regard to my upbringing and not raising my children in the church, my brother David said at one point to me that his only regret not raising his children in the church was that they wouldn't get all the references on Highway 61.
That's amazing. We have also kind of flirted with trying to raise our children in a religious tradition, finding one that we can kind of sign on to as the people we are now, and not to some kind of lingering or echo of an obligation of how we were raised. And I think the place we normally just kind of turn to in our community here, just outside Boston, was a Unitarian church. And I had to admit, I was a little nervous about that because the coffee house scene here in New England is very largely based in Unitarian churches. And there were times when I would play a Unitarian coffee house on a Saturday night, and then we would take the boys to Unitarian church Sunday morning. I was like, man, I feel like I'm just going back to work here. Like I'm on the payroll, of the Unitarian church. And I would go and I would listen to what they would say in the service, and it was so similar to the ideas and the concepts that I was exploring in my songs. And I wish I could have been slightly less selfish about it and just sucked it up for the sake of my kids, but I just couldn't. I kind of couldn't hang with it, and so we didn't stick with it. But it's something that I kind of wonder how that's going to shake out down the line. I have tried to show them that the same kind of that there's a sense of spirituality, a sense of something bigger, a sense of mystery that cannot, a code that cannot be cracked, a mystery, mystery forever. I have tried to show them that you can find those things wherever you look, if you look deeply and carefully enough. And I certainly found it in music. Before music, I found it in biology and the study of biology. I have this. I was laughing internally when you were talking about that sense of all these mysteries that kind of are nested within each other. I have this new song that I've written called "Sense of Wonder" that references that very thing. It's mysteries within mysteries, like an endless set of Russian nesting dolls. And if we could ever get there, we'd find a question at the center of it all. It's like there is no center. It's just turtles all the way down, as they say. And to me, I love that. And that I find that infinite, as you were saying, I think before, I find that infinite comforting. I don't find the fact that there may not be an answer to be alarming. I find it comforting.
No, I think that's how we're supposed to take it. My wife was a lot more uncomfortable with the decision about not taking our kids to a church every Sunday morning and on high holidays. Mm-hmm. I very instinctively was not. I just said, look, I've for my whole life I've had issues with somebody standing before me and telling me, this is the frame, this is the lens I'm allowed to look through. And I said, I can't ask my children to adopt that as some kind of ultimate terra firma, some, all-encompassing truth, if I don't find it there myself. That feels really hypocritical to me, and I won't be able to answer for it. And thus we didn't. A number of years ago, I became really dear friends with a politically radical Episcopal priest here in Pasadena, and I began to go to his church to hear him speak. And I had his permission. We talked about it. He would come over and we would drink whiskey under a pine tree in our yard. And he front-loaded the service with his sermon kind of up front, and then I would disappear. And he told me, you have every right to slip out, you know, when when you've had enough. But, my children have both a deep sense of morality and a spiritual attention that was not informed by me handing it to them any more than I was informed by the way that my parents, in great compassionate reverence for what they believed their job as parents to be, handed me, you know, um, you know, a shoehorn that would let me slip into their faith, like a pair of loafers, and it just didn't work for me. And my kids have really affirmed for me that, like, look, that is not the only path. And I have, great respect for people for whom, organized religion is a comfort and a guiding force and a sense of deep community. But in the same way that I bristled from formal education, I had a real difficult time in school and in college. I wanted to be anywhere else. And I just came to understand that the way that I learn is much more instinctive than somebody trying to directly school me. And I was resistant to church the same way that I was resistant to my college experience. I found myself in college sort of accidentally because I was of that generation where every parent thought if you can send your kids to college, you must.
Sure.
And if you can be sent, I had an obligation to go. And then I found myself like a person who had too much to drink one night and enlisted in the Navy and woke up on a ship and realized that my only way out of this is through. That's the only way out of college for me is to emerge from the other side, hopefully unscathed, untouched. And I felt the same way about myself as a young person sitting in a church, knowing that I was hearing a foreign language and that I was essentially spiritually in a foreign country.
Yeah. Man, I tell you, if I could find a religion where I could drink whiskey under a pine tree with a priest and then go see the sermon right up front and then leave, I think I would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I rode that. I rode that wave until he retired, or he moved back to Alabama a couple years ago, and he's doing all kind of incredible work. He's not a retired person; he's been just sort of released into. I mean, he is a very interdenominational. Like, he had Muslim clerics and Jewish rabbis sitting on the board of this Episcopal church, and he was on the board of their churches. They were very inclusive. I mean, his attitude and why we became friends was that he had the notion that, in this church we're speaking, English, and in this church they might be speaking a wholly other language. That doesn't mean that that's not pure truth. Right. We have a dialect and they have one, but they are not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. And I never had a relationship with, a priest or a minister of any sort who was that liberated. And, he's wildly so. He's as likely to quote, the Quran as he is to quote anything else. He gave a whole sermon once, in this grand old Episcopal church here, on Marvin Gaye, on his, he used his song, "A Stubborn Kind of Fellow," to describe, our relationship to the divine, our resistance to the divine.
That's amazing. Oh, that's so wonderful. You mentioned earlier about finding a deep sense of spirituality in music, and man, that certainly resonated with me. It also kind of brought to mind. I have here your newest record, which is amazing, "Gospel According to Water."
Thank you.
And the liner notes. I mean, in particular, I would recommend people get the record before you put it on. Read the liner notes because the essay is amazing, and there's a part in there that really dovetails with this whole kind of music as religion thing that I wanted to kind of dig into. And I think I'm quoting here when you wrote that you learn to regard no recording opportunity as anything other than sacred. And I was curious, did you mean that you're simply underscoring the focus and intention you inspire to bring to each recording session, or do you really feel a concrete kind of tangible sense that there is something much deeper and maybe even divine going on when we relate to other musicians and artists in that way.
Oh, I mean that literally. I mean that is communion. Um, you know, I have felt in relations, and I almost don't record, people live in a room. Something is happening that is beyond us. This is not everybody just showing up, with a part sketched out and reading it into the public record. It has to become like a séance where, you know, in a sense, everybody's sitting around a table holding hands, and then, a spirit gets conjured into the room that's not any one of us. And I think that is what happens. And I think because I consciously regard it that way, I'm sort of liberated to give into it. As a recording artist, as a producer, I'm not in control. I don't want to be in control.
Right.
I don't want to think I know what's going to happen. I mean, that's the most limiting thing in the world, to decide beforehand what you believe is about to happen. You are not leaving yourself open for any kind of revelation.
Yeah, it's like having the God in the book. It's like it's just too limited. It's not inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, Quincy Jones made that. And it's a quote that people are repeating always, that in the studio you have to leave room for God to walk through. You can't try to button things up so staunchly. You can't try to control what's going to happen, because then you're going to just be left with the limits of your own imagination. I got no interest in that. I can always go back to what I thought if we get stuck. But what I'm really trying to do is to be seduced by process. And the process, I believe, is sort of miraculous. And it is ultimately mysterious. We've all been there when we write a song, we think we understand it, we think we have it in our hands. And as soon as you're in a room with other people, it quickly tells you that it might live elsewhere. It might have a wholly different character. And that's when I feel like a song is alive. I have no interest in trying to control it. And in fact, the only issues I've ever had with artists, on my watch as a producer, are people who are so certain that they know what has to happen, and that they can't abide anything else happening that's not, that doesn't already sound like what they mean, what they think, they have to mean. And my response to that always is, look, I don't really care what you mean. I care what it means. I mean, we're here to let it speak. We're here to, so that whatever the power of the song is, can be articulated in a way that we can accept. But I don't believe for a minute that we're controlling or should be controlling what's happening.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. I mean, this kind of brings up or points me toward a thought that I had the other day in kind of preparing for this. In that, artists kind of frequently get kind of lumped in with liberals and kind of supposedly more godless kind of types, and I find that to be so strange, because at the very core of what we do is creation. And if creation is not the epitome of a holy act, then I don't know what is. uh, and and yet we're constantly creating these things, as you were saying before, that we know how they got there ostensibly. Like, we saw our hand with the pen write it down, but it doesn't mean that we can explain it, or that there's not still a mystery behind it. A lot of times I don't know where it comes from, and I know you feel the same. And so we have, as artists, we may not be conventionally religious, but we have this kind of, hopefully daily, if you're writing every day, kind of daily relationship with this creative act that is just so inherently holy and mysterious, and that really at its root cannot be explained if you're doing it right. And to me, I kind of feel, I guess I wouldn't primarily explain it as religious, but since we're doing God-ology, I would say that that feels like a very religious process, a kind of prayer in a way, that is really hard to kind of deny?
Oh, I think it's a meditation, and meditation is a form of prayer. And I know for a fact when Mark, as far as my writing life is concerned, that, I never show up to write anything, with an idea. I'm not one of those people who has an idea for a song. I don't want to have ideas. I want to have experiences. I think a song is not something that I do. It's something that happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I notice that if I show up, when in the past I've brought an agenda, to the table, then I'm fighting with myself the whole time. But if I just show up, ready to engage whatever the offering of the moment is, it can go anywhere. And I don't take credit for its creation. I might, if I'm being honest, I might take credit for showing up for it, for developing a craft so that I know, it might sound sort of hackneyed to go back to the analogy of fishing. Or Jesus was mad for that one, by the way. We have a skill set. It's important. We, over a period of time, learn, what part of the river to go to, where to wade into it, where we might, cast a hook and where we might have a net handy. But that does not mean that we've invented the fish. We're joining a tradition, and it can be shockingly new when it happens through us and for us. But I think it's deadly to inspiration to think that it begins with you. Believe in writer's block, for instance, never give it that kind of authority. I would never give silence, I would never label it something, fearful and, and horrific, as if, it's all stopped. I don't know what to do. It's like, I think you only feel paralyzed because if you think it originates with you, there's always work to do. I mentioned my brother Dave a short while ago. I remember early he's a short story and screenwriter who lives in Louisville, and we lived together up until the weekend before I got married. We moved from our parents' house together, so I lived with Dave my entire life and was in constant alliance with him. I still am in that regard, but we lived, we shared a dwelling up until I got married, and I remember asking him once, this whole idea of writer's block, do carpenters get cabinet block? Do they wake up one day and say, I know what a cabinet is, I have all these tools, I've seen myself use them, but for some reason today, there's no cabinet to be made. And I said, does that happen? And he said, well, it would if they thought it was important enough. When we put this great importance on what we're doing as artists, we can certainly freeze because it's too overwhelming to think about what we're doing is having incredible importance. I've got this idea that other people need to hear too. So I need to put it in 3 verses that rhyme so that I can hand it to people and they can carry it away with them. I just don't approach writing that way. I really look for it to be an experience. I stand here like a immovable hope that the wind of something blows through me, but I can't for the life of me imagine that I create the wind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, is that kind of, that seems like that concept is kind of maybe what you're getting at in, the song, the track is eluding me right now. Maybe it is the title track of the record where you talk about the water behind the wave. Is that this kind of same kind of concept that you're exploring there?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot of, I find myself talking, when I'm talking about process, I talk a lot about Buckminster Fuller, who I was fortunate enough to hear speak, one day when I was in college, and I had no idea who he was. And anybody listening, if you don't know who he is, go find out who he is. He was a remarkable human being. And in this lecture that I witnessed, he took a piece of rope and he made a knot in the middle of the rope, and he just slid the knot until it went off the end of the rope. And he said, so what was that? It was not the rope. It was a design of universe. It was a pattern integrity. The rope was just here to let us know about it. That shape exists in the universe, even when it's not on this piece of string, but he was holding a piece of rope so that we could see this design. And I think, a lot about that, those of us who attract songs, or, go out looking for them, we're here to let ourselves and the universe, people around us know about these concepts. We give it shape and clarity, hopefully, and some autonomy. But the idea that we stand, as ultimate creators as opposed to engagers, I think is the root of much evil and a lot of songs, frankly, that don't have a lot of use for me.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I mean, what you were saying there kind of brings to mind the song on the new record, that song Mule, with that line about the shadows leading us onward. And the way that I think of like conventional imagery, or conventional religious imagery, like Christianity kind of warns you of the shadows, something to be avoided, and walk in,
right,
and follow the light of Christ, that kind of thing. But as artists,
out of the shadow of darkness, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, as artists, we're
I like it in there. I like it
more compelled. Yeah, you're more compelled to kind of seek out what's in the shadows, and reveal it. And I guess there's sometimes someone could look at that as a form of vanity, like, oh, look what we found, But as you were kind of speaking about before, like, it was there. Whatever has been revealed was already there. We didn't create it. We might have shown it in a different light, or we might have provided an opportunity for folks to turn their ears or their hearts toward it for a second. But we're just illuminating kind of what's already there. And I really loved that part of the lyric of that song about the shadows almost being this opportunity for creation, which is, I was talking about before, is, I think about it as a very divine kind of holy thing. So you've got this holiness in the shadows that normally maybe you've been taught to kind of avoid in church. So it's
well, Mark, I think the real distinction is that, shadow, darkness is not the absence of light. Shadow is not the absence of light. A shadow lays on the ground to kind of tell you where light's coming from, where you can find light. It's a directional, this idea of binary understanding, of living, there can be no light without darkness. It is not, darkness doesn't live, in challenge to light. It's there to let you know about light when it happens. And I think it might sound like I'm arguing semantics, but I don't think so. As mortal beings who are all going to die one day, a concept of darkness as representing the end or representing peril, as opposed to representing, another half, it just doesn't work on me that way.
I love the darkness or the shadows as a kind of guide to see where the light is coming from. I mean, I've seen several songwriters on the comment feed here, and I'm just jealous that they can now all jump off and start writing that song. And I'm gonna hold on to it in my head for just a little bit longer. But that's just such a brilliant image. Wow. There's this. If I may, I know you wrote it. It may have been a while since you've read it, but for those people that are listening and watching this that haven't read the liner notes, there's this really beautiful paragraph that I just want to kind of highlight for a second here, and where you write, "I'm swimming in the deepest part of the river, where I am no longer so concerned as I once was about just where I mean to navigate, but more now about the water's intention, and how I might best reconcile myself with it, how I might abide its direction, free of fear and expectation, how to surrender to its authority while maintaining my own vision and balance. And just how I may, God help me, think less here forward about leaving a mark, and more about how we are all, and by grace, but an unknowable extension of divine gesture, leveled at horizon. Good God. That is just the whole fact right there. Do you remember writing that? I mean, did that just kind of wash over you, or did you develop it logically? Like, how did that happen?
No, I mean, logic was never into it. I mean, I do recall, at least partially, writing those notes, and it happens to be the same way the song happens, where it always sounds a little coy, I think, to people who are not songwriters or writers to hear someone say what I'm about to say. That it does become a little bit like taking dictation, where it's like feeding a kite up into the air. Have this idea of of need. I need a song, or in this case, I needed this brief essay, and it's just sort of about feeding a kite up into the air until it finds a stream of air, of movement, and then you can just sort of you know ride that movement as best you can. You're not controlling it, but hopefully you can be graceful within it. And I was trying to articulate something very particular in that moment of writing those, without putting too fine a point on it. Those songs, all the songs in that record, just sort of happened to me really quickly. At a moment of kind of deep distress in some ways. I was, having a significantly frightening health issue, and I don't think any of the songs, and I think I say that in there somewhere, none of these songs are, about cancer, but a cancer diagnosis, set me off balance in a way where I was really free for those songs to happen to me. And I knew where they came from, but I was really reluctant to share it, even though I thought it would be help to understand their origin, or their point of departure. But I was afraid to offer that up because, my fear is that people think that where a song comes from is by defact, in fact, what a song is, and I don't believe that at all. I know that the fact that I was kind of knocked on the back of my heels there for a time had allowed a certain kind of song to flourish, where I was very given over to the instinctive process of them, wanting to kind of move through me and out. And I thought that the context of my experience might be helpful in understanding the songs, which maybe are a little obtuse to some people. But I was really, really fearful of anybody thinking, oh, that's his cancer record. I can't control that, but I my way of making peace with it outright. Say, if you choose to think this way about this song, it's because I'm sharing this part of my personal story. I can't stop you, but I want to encourage you to get over that, because that's not what these are. I know what allowed them to happen, what made the room go still for me, and that these songs appeared. But the songs aren't messages from me, to you about my troubles.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that kind of comes up anytime as a writer you are perceived to delve in, or you write a lot in the wake of some kind of personal thing. It's assumed that those songs are from that, and that might even be true on some level in the way that you were saying before. You know what rocked you back on your heels and allowed you to see these songs, but that doesn't mean they're about that. And we don't really have control over how that is perceived. But that's a danger, for anything, not just the breakup album, the divorce album, the cancer album. It's like all the time.
Well, I made a record in I think it came out in 2002 that was called Tiny Voices,
Mhm.
and I wrote a lot of that record in the aftermath of 9/11, and except for a couple of moments where I understand that I was getting too close to the bone as to the weather that I was standing in. I wasn't trying to write about that event, but I knew that the trauma of that moment, like so much trauma in life, um, you know, was worthy of engagement. Um, so I can listen back to that record if I was going to, and probably hear a lot of the tension, a lot of the fear as a parent of young people as I was at the time.
Mm.
All that coming forward. Though there's no way that album is about that event. You know, it just created a certain climate where you know it was not the character in the songs. It might have, as I've said before, it might have blown the hat off the character, and then we watch him chase it down the street. That's the story.
Yeah.
But I'm not writing. I'm not writing about the weather.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. Man, I could literally talk about this forever. I do have to coach I have to fill in for the coach of a little league baseball game in a short while. I don't know what I'm doing, but
That sounds worthwhile.
it's there's something there too in terms of what feeds your art and what your songs, and you never know kind of what's going to inspire it. But I will say, in closing, that the first time I've been a fan and a follower of your music, basically since Kindness of the World. And the first time I ever saw you play live was at Pearl Street in Northampton, Massachusetts. Um, did you ever tour with Abe Laboriel Jr. on drums?
I recorded with him. I played on TV with him once.
All right. Well, it must have been someone.
Yeah, not Abe. Yeah.
Okay. It was a very muscular drummer like him, and this would have been '99. So
I bet it was Kurt Mascara.
it probably was. It probably was. Just remember, you came out in like a pinstripe suit and rocked out, and had your back to the audience at several points, and it was the coolest goddamn thing I've ever seen in my life.
And I wasn't trying to be Miles Davis or anything. I just was trying to meet my fellow bandmates.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's disconcerting having them behind you all the time and not being able to kind of look them in the eye. It's just such a pleasure to have you engage with this topic with me, knowing that we would never solve anything or answer anything. It's just a kind of picking something up and kind of holding it to the light and looking at it from a bunch of different angles. Feels like such a luxury, and it maybe wouldn't have been one we would have had if we weren't all in quarantine and locked down. But I'm so grateful for the gift of your time.
Oh, Mark, thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking to you. And I'll just, it's probably a really obvious place to put a period on this sentence, but I'm forever going back to Rilke. When he said that we have to live the questions. It is never about getting down to the answer. I'm sorry to tell you there won't be one, or I should say, I'm delighted to tell you there won't be one. Because what a burden an answer would be. I can't take responsibility for that. But the concept of abiding endless question is the substance of living, of mortal living, and the sooner we get reconciled to that fact, the easier it is to kind of embrace the chaos that invariably moves around us.
Man, I'm going to use that answer when the kids ask me what inning it is. I'm just going to say, abiding endless question. That's life. I don't know.
Just keep your eye on the ball. You don't have to worry about what inning it is. So if somebody's hurling a ball at you, catch it or hit it. That's all you need to think about.
Exactly.
How much time do I got left? That just can't enter into it.
Yeah, exactly. Man, thank you so much. I wish you all the best and continued good health. And
Thank you,
I was
Mark.
supposed to see you in March when you were in Boston, and that, of course, didn't happen. But until we meet again, I'll catch you the next time.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. Good talking to you.
Likewise. Take care, everybody.